Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Tuesday night Eventide stream. Hi there, I am Jason Bowman. I'm the creator of Eventide and a little game called Pathfinder. Today, I figured I'd gather folks up and chat a bit about a topic that was suggested to me by folks in the Discord channel. If you haven't joined the Discord, you really should do so. It's a great place for us to kind of chat and have a bit more of a conversation than is possible on Patreon, which kind of requires a bit of a back and forth. It's kind of like sending messages on a message board. It's not quite as active. And frankly, I check Discord all the time and get notifications. Patreon takes a little bit to get those things to me. So Discord is really the place you want to go if you want to be able to chat with me a bit more directly about Eventide. And you get access through the Patreon. So, yeah. So today, I asked folks kind of what did they want to hear about, and I saw a handful of ideas, and there are a few in there that I think might be interesting for, some point in the future. But one of the things was just, there was a theme kind of running through some of it about where some things went. There are some things that are gone, and what happened to them. What is the impact on the world of the things that have been lost? So I figured this might be a good chance to chat about this. I don't know how long of a topic it is. It'll go as long as it goes here tonight. Yeah, I figured, that might be a kind of an interesting thing to chat about. So this is a bit more of a free-form conversation and less of a... Sometimes I have presentations. Not tonight. Tonight I'm just going to kind of riff on... this aspect of the game, because it's not something I examine in depth in any one of the books. It's kind of a thing that has occurred just as a result of the events of the story. So all of this ties back to Eventide. Now, to have a firm understanding of that, we probably have to go back to before Eventide to kind of understand what the status of the world was before that event. Right? So if you go back to before Eventide, and you look at the continent of Alnir, it's a pretty stable place at that point in time in the years leading directly up to Eventide. There had been wars between dwarves and elves, and between, dwarves and humans, and the past had been kind of littered with conflict. The first two peoples to really establish large presence and kind of map the continent were the elves, followed shortly thereafter by the dwarves. So the elves have been living there for a long time. Their memory goes back time immemorial. But they have kind of a scattered, disjointed history. Their prehistory was an oral tradition. So it's less about having concrete writings about how things went and how many years passed, and more about stories from the before time, before the other peoples showed up and started exploring the place. And the elves lived in collectives. They had small communities dotted all around the continent, living in beautiful places and kind of living their long lives. The dwarves showed up several thousand years ago and kind of came up from below. They came up from the earth, and their origin story says that they were born of the earth, that they one day the stones began to speak, and the next day the stones began to sing, and soon after the stones began to move, and that is how the dwarven people came. But they were not content to live only under the stone, and eventually made their way to the surface, and they formed, mighty cities, and kind of created fortresses on the surface, because, they had come from a much more dangerous place, right? The world underneath is a very dangerous place. And when they got to the surface, they treated it just like anywhere else. They built fortresses, and they had a tradition of naming their major settlements after a weapon or piece of armor or tool that was crafted there. So whenever a settlement would grow to be of a certain size, the master craftsman there would make one brand new item. And that would be how the place got its name. Before that, it would just be called an outpost, and, that you know, an outpost or a settlement, and it would have some smaller colloquial name, but it didn't have a grand title until that implement was forged. So that is why all the dwarven cities are named things like Flametongue and Frostbrand and Skyhammer and Silver Spear, and you know, that's how those things got their name. Rhyme Shield, right, up in the Icescar Valley, was just big enough to get its own thing. And I think it might be the sort of thing where each settlement, once it starts growing, kind of creates its thing and hopes it catches on and becomes big enough. But not all of them do, right? So yeah, folks, no worries if sorry, I'm responding to chat here. For folks who are catching this, who are on different time zones, I realize this can be very late for some folks. But yeah, the VOD is always going to be there for you. So, you know, feel free to enjoy. So, you've got the elves and the dwarves. And the humans eventually show up. And they show up kind of sporadically. Some arrive via boats. Not like they humans were unknown before this point in time. They were just not as common. They were more like travelers and explorers and merchants. But they started showing up in mass coming from the north, coming across the kind of great ice flows that lie to the north of Alnir. And they were migrating, escaping some catastrophe, a catastrophe that they do not speak of. And this happened, you know, before kind of the start of the current calendar. I'm not looking at an exact timeline right now, so I'm just kind of remembering this. And they kind of start scattering around and settling in places, and eventually they kind of start filling in the cracks between the dwarves and the elves. And the dwarves and the elves are done fighting at this point in time. They already had their wars. But the humans start kind of taking over territory, and as time goes on, they expand and expand and expand, and eventually they come into conflict with the dwarves. And that starts another war between the dwarves and the humans over territory and terrain. One that eventually gets settled and leads to the foundation of the Kingdom of Zankar. Not the Zankar Imperium yet, it's just the Kingdom of Zankar. And the dwarves cede a bunch of plains territory to the humans to get them to kind of relinquish some of their aggression. The humans had taken the dwarven citadel of Skyhammer, which was their capital on the surface, and the humans agreed to give it back in exchange for kind of a cessation of hostilities and a place to call their own. So you got that going on. You've got halflings who have arrived at this point in time from Helenanthus. They land on a part of Alnir called Bellcrash, and they found a city there, and it's growing and thriving, and halflings are very, very fecund. They have very large families, so as a result, they're growing by leaps and bounds, and they're kind of moving all over the place. You have ogre settlements and cities kind of scattered all along the west coast of Alnir, and by this point in time, their civilization had kind of started to crumble because of a spreading kind of contagion or curse that like warped their minds and stole them from them their kind of sense of community and turned them into kind of monsters. That's how you got the ogres that we know of today. Those ones are the descendants of those who fell to this curse. So before that, though, ogres were different and a lot more like giants. Giants and ogres in Eventide share a similar point of origin and are very closely related. But ogres were kind of the smallest amongst them, and they succumbed to this terrifying curse. And as a result, now they're kind of roaming monsters. So you got that going on. But there are other ancestries as well, right? You've got gnomes. Gnomes lived in the world in these days. They were quiet. They didn't have very large cities or settlements. They usually just had small villages and thorps in beautiful places of the world. They have very high... Gnomes had a very strong tie to nature and the natural world. They were brilliant woodworkers and carvers. And frankly, they kind of just stayed out of the way of bigger folk. They were more content to kind of live alongside the elves. In fact, the gnomes and the elves got along very well. And had kind of mutual understanding and enjoyment of nature. But for the gnomes, it was deeply personal. For them, their tie to the natural world kind of threads through their soul. A question for the chat. Could there be a remnant of uncursed ogres? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there are some. They're very rare. And they avoid others of their kind because they don't want to catch the contagion. Because it is still possible. Unfortunately, it only seems to affect giants. So human creatures, there's a I'm trying to remember the exact reference. There is a valley called the Howling Valley. That is where this contagion came from. And the ogres that came out of it were howling and feral and attacking everyone on sight, and they turned into monsters. So the world also had a lot of other things in it as well at this point in time. Magical creatures were not uncommon. Dragons were a thing in the world. I don't talk about them much in the current Gazetteer because they're so rare. Obviously, a dragon plays a very important part in the history of Wormbone, but active dragons in the world these days are quite rare. But back then, they were a bit more common. They would fly around. They had territories. I've always kind of envisioned dragons in Eventide as being more like territorial predators and less about, earth-shaking political movers who, through intermediaries and magic influence the march of years. They're not that way in Eventide. They're more like very cunning, very smart, in some cases brilliant, right? Territorial predators. They don't have much interest in the day-to-day lives of little folk, but that doesn't mean they don't keep an interest in them just to make sure that they don't mess with their territory. The dragons are a thing in the world. Fae were a thing, right? The elves, the gnomes, were very familiar with the Fae. The Fae, lurked in some of the same places that they did. Dwarves likewise dealt with underground Fae and creatures of that nature, right? But it goes beyond that as well, because other creatures and monsters were far more common as well, especially outsiders, right? Demons and devils were a thing in the world back then. That doesn't mean they're not now, but they're less common now. All of those things are different then than they are now. Now it goes beyond that as well, because it also goes to, how magic used to be in the world, right? People used to rely on magic to help them with their everyday lives, right? It wouldn't be uncommon for, folks in a household to have somebody who knew prestidigitation or knew various sorts of simple magics, just to help them get along. Magic used to be a common tool. Now, that doesn't mean everybody was throwing around fireballs or anything like that, but it was far more common for folks to dabble and maybe have a little bit of magical training, or, study and work to learn a simple cantrip or two to allow them to help out on their daily lives. And of course, with that came more powerful spellcasters as well. The elves were said to have a lot of powerful magic at their disposal, with the ability to create doorways between their settlements, to craft incredibly powerful magic items that could reshape reality and do all sorts of things. The dwarves likewise created incredible weapons and armors and, things that, were frankly of interest to dwarves, and that were renowned for those sorts of things. These mighty relics that they named their cities after are a legacy of that, right? These things are ancient and powerful weapons. All of this was kind of the setup of the world of Eventide before Eventide. So, Eventide happened. Right? So, in 276, late in that year, there is a storm of darkness that envelops the world. The sun is not seen for 3 weeks. And when it does finally come back, it comes back in fits and spurts for another week or so before the weather finally returns to normal and kind of broiling sky of darkness fades away. And after that, everything changed. And it didn't happen overnight. That's the thing. It was pretty gradual. And frankly, some of it was so gradual that in the span of a human lifetime, they might not notice too much of a difference at all. All of the people who had little, magical knacks and things like that continued to use them, most of them for the rest of their lives, and they didn't really notice. They maybe, 5 years later had the spell not work on them the first time they tried to cast it, right? And then they had to do it again. But they didn't notice because they just assumed that they did it wrong, right? That they must have screwed up the incantation. No, they didn't. It just failed to work. That's how it went for most, but not for all. For some folks, the change was drastic and rather sudden. And for them, their tie to magic was changed. Subtly for some and more drastically for others, that led to kind of catastrophic side effects. And this happened over the next... The most severe things happened over the next about 100 years. And the subtler stuff has been playing out ever since. And the subtler stuff really has to do more with arcane magic and divine magic. The more sudden stuff, the stuff that happened immediately, had to do with primal magic. Primal magic got kind of cut off after Eventide. It dwindled very fast. And some of the first people to feel it were Fae and gnomes. They were the first. Within 10 years, all the gnomes were gone. They left. And it would start with the gnome, because gnomes are in all these various communities and in their own little settlements. And it would start with the gnome suddenly becoming very irritable and having long periods of depression. And then one day the gnome would just get up and leave. They'd leave all their stuff behind. They'd just wander off into the wilderness. They'd never be seen again. And that's it. That's what happened to all of the gnomes. Every single one of them had that exact thing occur to them. For the Fae, it was even more dramatic. They were all gone within a few years. And honestly, most folks didn't even notice, because Fae were already kind of a thing that lurked out in the wilderness that you didn't deal with very often. But the elves noticed that their Fae friends, many of whom were contacts and allies, though mercurial, all of a sudden went silent and could no longer be reached, could no longer be talked to. Heading out to the Dryad's forest, they found its tree burned down. And the Dryad was gone. Red caps and gremlins and all the other sorts of fake creatures just vanished. No one really knows what happened to them. It wasn't like people were looking at them and they just vanished. They just disappeared. They just weren't there anymore. And whether or not they died and faded away, or whether or not they left and went somewhere else, whether or not they were pulled somewhere else, no one really knows. To this day, no one knows. Arvanis may have figured it out. If you recall, Arvanis is the scholar who began studying Eventide shortly after it happened and spent the rest of his life dedicated to studying Eventide. And at the end, penned a book called The Seven Truths, which he sent to a number of places and then promptly took. So maybe he knew. That's some of the theories. The Dawnbringers believe that. The Dawnbringers believe that Arvanis knew exactly what was happening, that he actually figured it. But no one's been able to find a copy of the Seven Truths to learn what's in there. So, So it didn't stop there, though, right? There were other knock-on effects as well. Druids almost overnight lost their ability to speak to nature. For them, it was very quick. It was like someone reached into the sink and pulled the plug on primal magic because it just stopped working. It was sporadic for a little while, but it became very, very unstable and then just finally stopped altogether, and druids lost all of their magical abilities. All of it. So, the world, because most of this didn't happen immediately, and where it did happen immediately was pretty isolated, right? Like, oh, the druid in town suddenly had a bad couple of months and then moved away, right? You know, or you know, stopped calling themselves a druid and changed professions, right? You know, weird things like that happen. But those were pretty isolated, right? Now, they didn't know that in faraway remote places, the druids had, you know, a catastrophe of faith, and it led to infighting and schisms and bloodshed, right? They don't know that that happened, because it happened in the middle of nowhere. So, for most places, and this is the thing about Eventide that I'm trying to make sure that we express and explore, most places just moved on. They didn't notice. Most people didn't know a druid. Most people didn't know very many gnomes. And, you know, in human cities, they barely noticed at all, right? So, at the same time, you then start getting into the long-term effects, the things that took hundreds of years to kind of slowly manifest and play out. And that's arcane magic becoming unstable in some places, and people losing the ability to just pick up a spell or two. No one could do that anymore. The only way you could do it is starting to have really hardcore practice, and eventually having to rely on fragments of old relics or magic items to boost your connection to magic, to even do the simplest of tricks, simplest of incantations. But as I said, these things were really slow. Now, at the same time, these things started the effects that hit the gnomes and the fae and druids very quickly. Some of the longer knock-on effects started to affect dwarves and elves, right? We've talked about this. The dwarves, many dwarves started to feel a longing to return back to their ancestral homes beneath the earth, and those who go on this quest, who go on this wandering, don't come back. The elves had kind of a different thing. Their birth rate just crashed. They suddenly, you know, frankly, stopped being able to have children. And as a result, their population has just dwindled over the past century. Right? I mean, this is almost 1,000 years now. It's been going on for 900 years. And as a result, the dwarven and elven population are like a tenth of what they once were. Right? They're losing like 10% per year. Not quite like that, or per 100 years. It's not like they're going to just disappear in 100 years, but we're getting down to the point where it's starting to become really marginal. Likewise, some of those magical creatures and whatnot suddenly became far less common as well. Dragons either went into an endless slumber, or some just died outright. You have the dragon that flew to Wormbone and tried to tear apart Wolfrin's tower and then just died. It's not the only place that stuff like that happened. Wormbone's story is interesting and unique because its skeleton is still in the middle of town. But there are plenty of places where other things like that happen, where magical creatures kind of lost it. And throughout these years, throughout the 900 years, right, the ability to use certain magics became unstable, right? Planar magics became very unstable. To the point where when you summon a creature, there's a chance it doesn't go back at the end, and if it doesn't, you lose control of it and it can do whatever it wants. And oftentimes it's pretty angry that it's not where it's supposed to be. So summonings became very, very rare. People stopped learning those. You know, why would you risk it? Too dangerous. So, and again, all of this happened slowly, and as a result, society just adjusted, right? It's not. There's a reason why when folks ask me what the theme of this, I'm like, it's a slow-moving fantasy apocalypse. And what I mean by that is that it's so slow that life carries on, despite the fact that terrible things are happening. People just kind of adjust, and this is kind of the story of human history to some extent, right? You know, bad things happen, folks still find a way to carry on. So in most of these places where magic suddenly becomes unstable, they started turning more to alchemy and medicine. As the elves and the dwarves vanished, the humans expanded, the halflings expanded, goblins expanded, orcs expanded, right? All of these other peoples that weren't so intrinsically tied to magic suddenly found they could expand all they wanted. The dwarves were gone. The elves were gone. They abandoned their cities. All of the Icescar Valley used to be owned by elves and dwarves, right? The elves founded Ilsanvenir. The dwarves had the settlement of Rhymeshield. And they lived on an easy peace for quite a while. But after Eventide, Rhymeshield was all but abandoned. Ilsanvenir held on for another 50 to 100 years before it too was abandoned. You know, that was it, right? And now it's a place dominated by humans. And you know, there are still dwarves and elves that call the place home, but they are now few and far between. And some of those things from the early days are now nothing more than myths and legends. Folks assume that in some cases they're not even true. Stories of brownies and red caps and gremlins. No one believes any of that anymore. That's nonsense. They put gnomes in the same category, right? Gnomes. Fanciful nonsense. Unless you're going to tell me they were in league with dragons, right? You know, that's just how people are now. It's been 900 years. Some of these creatures haven't been seen for 10 generations of humans. After 10 generations of humans, trust me, the stories get real thin. They get real distorted. And oftentimes they're going to turn into legends and myths and filled with inaccuracies in the retellings. Now there's still obviously lots of remnants, and the dwarves and the elves are still around. So they you know, have, some of them are much longer lived, right? You know, some of them have longer ancestral knowledge and memories of these things, right? There are elves who, you know, there are probably a few elves floating around out there that were, you know, I think it's still possible that there might be a few elves who lived through Eventide. They'd be venerable, and they would have had to have been a child when it happened. So they would remember, but, you know, thank you story from, you know, great grandma, elf. That's nice. We'll put you to bed. We'll put on your stories. You know, I think those things are now basically gone. So the world has kind of moved on. Humans have their own kind of current concerns and worries. They're not sitting around fretting about what happened to people who have been gone for 900 years. And for most folks, those things are just the problems, the things that happened in the past. That's history. So that's kind of the setting, right, of what is lost. The key to making this sing in your story is that the modern folks just kind of gloss over it, right? They don't really think about it. For them, it's not a big deal. And for the players, it shouldn't be either at first, right? And that comes around, that brings us around full story to what's going on in Wolfren's Fate. Because Wolfren's Fate is there to take the characters from kind of a neutral state of like, yep, this is what we are. We're fantasy adventurers. And slowly through the course of the adventure, start pulling back the veil that this isn't right. That although it seems normal enough, although, you know, yeah, there's still, you know, towns and traders and guards and monsters and there's skeletons and we can go fight rats and, you know, go do adventures, that there's something unusual about the world, that not everything is okay. That that there are many things that are gone from the world and more things are disappearing day by day. And that this should be troubling folks, but most people don't even notice or can't be bothered to understand the danger. That's the key to all of this. And you can't, from a storytelling perspective, you can't really like get folks to recognize that. You can't just like shake them and be like, pay attention to this, right? The way to do it is to lure them in with mysteries and things that don't make sense, right? You know, in part 1 of Wolfren's Fate, they get down into Wolfren's library and laboratory, and in there, Actually, wait a minute. This is actually up in the parlor. In a glass jar, there is a tiny skeleton of a pixie. There's a pixie skeleton. And no one can identify it because no one knows what it is anymore. And it's meant to be this sort of thing that's like, wait, it's a little winged humanoid? What's that? Right? You know, that's the entire point, is that you're supposed to be left going, I don't get it. Right? Like, what is that? And why can't I understand what it is? It's obvious what it is. But my knowledge won't tell me what it is because my character doesn't have that knowledge anymore because it's lost from them. So, that is kind of where all of this is going, right? And that is part of kind of setting up the central conceit and mystery of the world, is that the fundamental nature of magic has shifted. Nobody knows why, and nobody knows where this is going. And the terrible part is most people don't care because they don't know. They don't know what they don't have anymore because they were born 800 years after nobody had it. So for them, right, you know, yeah, wings. Is it a bird? Is it a bird person? No, it's not a bird person. The little weird insect wings. What? Right? And there's other stuff like that too. In that first bit of the adventure, there's a whole bunch of kind of ominous shit that's just like, what's going on here? And the answer is, stuff. You know, secrets and stuff. So it is kind of meant to be mostly a background thing, right? The choices that I made were very, very, very deliberate. I do want to stress that. That's one thing that is hard for me to convey without having the whole mystery laid bare, is everything I've done is done with a certain deliberate thought process. It all plays into the narrative in one way, shape, or form or another, or is a knock-on, add-on effect of something greater that is happening. And it obviously has some thrust and direction, but it's not apparent, and as a result I realized that some of these choices can seem kind of arbitrary. Obviously gnomes and druids and fae are all tied together by their connection to the natural world. So there's something there. But what it is and how that goes on, and then how it relates to arcane magic and divine magic, which are also seeing weird effects, isn't perfectly clear. And the fact that planar magic is starting to get weird, right? There's something wrong. But again, it lives in the realm of beyond kind of personal, the average experience of most humanoid creatures. You're a goblin, you're a human, you're living in your city, you're doing your life. You're never going to know any of this stuff has happened. None of it's going to make any sense to you. And frankly, a lot of it sounds like a bunch of hokum and occult nonsense, right? So the end result is just kind of, there are questions, and the players get to be, right, the entire point of this is to set the players up as some of the special folk who start to figure it out, who start to understand that something's wrong, and then start to learn about what exactly is wrong, and maybe even learn about why it's wrong. But that's going to take time. And it's not going to be revealed in Wolfrun's Fate, right? I mean, Wolfrun's Fate is here to do setup work. And a lot of it. Because there's a lot of world lore to kind of lay groundwork on. And I think it's coming together nicely. I do think I've been very entertained with my group starting to grok kind of how the world is off in ways, right? And it's little things, you know, but it is starting to become apparent to them that, you know, all of this stuff isn't right. And, you know, they're being hunted by weird gaunt shadow creatures. They're, you know, just because they're investigating an old wizard's tower, it doesn't make any sense to them, but they were warned, you know, hey, these guys are coming. They don't want you to learn anything about this. They try and stop us at every turn as well, right? So, you know, that whole story is kind of coming to a head. Not quite there yet, but it should be fun. Right now, just as so I think that's about all I got on that topic. I want to talk a little bit about how the playtesting is going here before we wrap up here today. So the playtest groups have now met. Both of them have now met in the new year. I've got a new player joining one of the groups, but not until we're done with part 2 of Wolfram's Fate, so not for another couple of weeks. But they will be joining between parts 2 and 3, and I'm super excited to be adding this person to my group. I don't want to announce who they are until they're confirmed and actually in the group, but they're someone whose name you will recognize. So that's kind of fun. We got that going on, and yeah, they're both getting to the ends of part 2. As a matter of fact, both of them are now in the Gaunt lair, in the sewers, on the second day of Eventide. Both groups still have to find out where the ring is. They will be able to do that after they deal with the Gaunt lair the next day during the kind of celebration that wraps up the Eventide festival, right? So they're both very close to kind of finishing up this part of the adventure and being able to move into part 3, which is very exciting. So there is that going on. Now, my next session with them is this coming Thursday and the following Monday. So busy, lots of stuff going on. So that should be fun. I'm looking forward to that. Now, I've got some other news as well. And folks, you here are going to be first people who get to know it. I'm going to tell you first, this is not Eventide related, but as my patrons, I'm going to let you in on the secret. 2 things are coming up here in the next few weeks. The first is I am going to be participating in Third Party Con. Third Party Con is an online convention being held over the weekend of February 18th and 19th. It's that weekend. I think events actually start on the 17th and go through the 20th. But that is Third Party Con. I am doing 2 events in Third Party Con, both in service of Hope Finder. The reason I'm not doing Eventide is because I don't have anything ready to sell for Eventide yet, but Hope Finder is already out. And that'll become more clear here in June. So I'm going to be doing a live play of Hope Finder during Third Party Con. So if you are excited to see Hope Finder played live, well, not live, it's going to be recorded, but if you want to see me play Hope Finder with a group, a podcasting group, whose name is eluding me, I'm going to look it up because I don't want to screw it up. I am playing with Pot Against the Machine is who I'm playing with. And they have volunteered to be my guinea pigs to play some Hope Finder with me. We are doing that. And I'm doing a 1-hour seminar about hacking Pathfinder 2e and the creation of Hope Finder. Now, I'm doing all of that for my other big piece of news. I am doing a Kickstarter to fund a print edition of Hope Finder. That's right, everybody. We are doing a Kickstarter. It's going to be a short Kickstarter, no frills. It's not going to be a big thing to generate a whole bunch of content. But I've had a lot of folks want a print version of Hope Finder, and the best way for me to do that is to offer it through crowdfunder. So I'm telling you all here first that is what we are going to be doing. We are going to be crowdfunding Hope Finder. And the easiest way to do that is going to be for like $25. You'll be able to get a print copy of the Survivor's Guide and the Narrator's Guide. That's it. That's $25. You have to pay shipping. That's it. But I've offered a few other goals as well. There's a version where you can get a copy, 4 copies of the Survivor's Guide and a copy of the Narrator's Guide. So you get like your whole group bundle. There's a retailer bundle that allows you to get like 4 copies for your retail store. And then I've got a couple deluxe bundles. And by deluxe, I mean really deluxe. There's a $75 version, which is going to be a hand-stressed version of Hope Finder. So I'm going to take the versions that get sent to me. I'm going to replace the cover with the kind of standard army manual cover, and then I'm going to distress it. And by that, I mean I'm going to beat it up, and I'm going to make it look like it's survived the apocalypse. I'm going to burn it. I'm going to ink stain it. I'm going to do all sorts of things to it. That's the Z-Day edition. That's going to be a part of the campaign as well. And then there's one other version, and this is very expensive, so I don't know if I'm going to sell any, but we'll see. There is the Apocalypse Edition. The Apocalypse Edition will be one that I hand print myself. I don't get my print company to do it. I hand print it myself. I will distress it myself. and I will fill it full of notes and other little things to customize it to you and your group. I will take names from you and write inside of it and customize the inside of the book. That is the Apocalypse Edition. That is going to be $250 because I'm going to spend a bunch of time working on it. So that is coming. I don't know if anybody's going to be interested in that. If they are, that's great. I'm willing to throw a few hours at customizing their book and making it awesome. That is what that is worth to me. So you also get a regular edition version. You get all the PDFs and all the stretch goals. And by stretch goals, I mean I am going to be putting out 1 or 2 little stretch goals, maybe some stickers. I'm not writing like a whole extra book. That's just not part of this. I'm just trying to fund the print version right now, just so I can have a print version. So there is that. All right, folks. You're the first ones to know. Keep it a secret. I'm going to be making an announcement about it soon. But you folks get to know first as my patrons and as folks who have been supporting me here this whole time. That is coming down. That's going to happen. And I'm hoping to launch it right before Third Party Con by at least a few days. That would be next week. I don't know if I can actually make that happen. I'm sprinting to finish up the page and get it all ready. We'll see. We'll see. So that's what I got going on, folks. I want to thank you all for watching. I will not be mentioning this in my other stream, so you get to know. Keep it a secret. But I will be announcing it far and wide here soon as I try and get folks signed up on a mailing list and stuff like that. Oh, there will be one adventure that I'm adding to this. The Ridgecrest Mall adventure, which is the adventure I'm going to be running at Third Party Con. So, Third Party Con, I will be running an adventure at the Ridgecrest Mall, shopping mall, where the players have to go and get some presents for Christmas. So that's what we're doing. It's gonna be great, and that's what the adventure is. The adventure is going to be printed on a. This is one of the stretch goals. Is going to be printed on laminate trifold brochure, like the kind you get at the mall, like that has the mall map and stuff on it. That's what the adventure is going to be printed in. So, I know 250 is quite a bit. I know that's very expensive, but I kind of did the math on how long it's going to take me to make it and do all the stuff, and that's what it's worth to me. So, if folks are interested in it, great. If not, that's fine too. The Z-Day edition will be nice. And I might even throw a couple notes in the Z-Day edition, but they won't be personalized. So, yeah, we'll see how it goes. That's all I have today, folks. I got a stream coming up here in just 15 minutes playing more Wrath of the Righteous. So if you want to watch that, hop on over to Twitch, folks. I want to thank you all for watching. I want to thank you for your patronage. As a quick update, the layout is coming along. I'm on about page 12, so I'm almost halfway done with the layout of this. I'm kind of squeezing it in between all of the other things going on right now, including planning for Third Party Con and getting the Kickstarter up and running. It's all coming together. It's just all trying to squeeze through the same door. So, I'm taking Friday off to actually do a bunch of this work. And I have to film this weekend and do all that kind of stuff. So, it's busy. But, yeah. That's what I got going on, folks. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for your support. It means the world to me. It's keeping me going and keeping this stuff happening. So, thank you very much for that. Thank you for watching, everybody. We'll see you over on the other stream. Take care. We'll see you next time.